crowd's mockery died in their throats when a solitary cowboy stepped forward, declaring, "My boy has need of her." New Mexico Territory. Dust hollow July heat of 1878. The merciless sun blazed overhead like nature's own punishment, casting harsh shadows across parched ground. Every footfall stirred clouds of grit around the crude wooden platform erected in the town's heart. Already a mob had gathered liquor-soaked men in grimy clothing, their appetites whetted by others' misery. Drawn to the kind of savage entertainment that thrived in godless territories, this wasn't commerce. This was cruelty made public. 20-2-Year-old Karen Mayfield stood upon that stage, her feet bare against rough planks, wrists bound in corroded shackles that carved bloody furrows into her flesh. What remained of her once ivory gown hung in shreds, yet her spine remained unbowed. Her emerald gaze, fierce as broken bottle glass, cut through the jeering masses below. Terror had no place in those eyes, only blazing defiance. The inebriated auctioneer's voice boomed across the chaos. "Property of Old Man Mayfield. Settling gambling debts fair and square. She's got fight in her, but nothing that can't be tamed." Roars of approval erupted. Karen never wavered. When some drunkard hollered for her to look pretty, she advanced to the platform's edge, chains rattling, and spat into the dust. Her words rang out clear as church bells. "My soul remains beyond your reach." The laughter stuttered to silence. A sweating brute in brown leather climbed the stage, reeking of tobacco and rot-gut whiskey. Without warning, his palm cracked across her cheek. Blood bloomed at her lips' corner while the mob cheered, but Karen slowly turned back to face them, lifted her bloodied chin, and smiled not sweetly, but with terrible purpose. The nervous auctioneer gestured toward his board. "Well then, we'll start the bidding." $20, drawled a voice from the crowd's rear. Heads swiveled as people parted like grain before wind. Jeb Crowley, master of the region's largest cattle empire, swaggered forward. Gold thread adorned his vest, his boots gleaming unlike his character. He examined Karen like a butcher appraising meat. "20 it is," he repeated. "Hell, I'll throw in a wedding band, though she won't be needing it." Turning to his audience, he added with cruel mirth, "I'll show this wild mare what submission means." Savage approval erupted from the watchers. Karen's gaze sharpened to daggers, though she held her tongue. Below in the dusty street, a small boy gripped his father's weathered hand. 6-year-old Eli, thin as prairie grass, gazed up with worried eyes. His whisper barely carried. "She has the same sadness Mama wore before she went away." The man Sam Coltrane, rancher, widower, former gunslinger, studied the stage through steel-gray eyes, his jaw set like granite. For long moments, he remained motionless. Then he moved. His boots drummed against earth as he pushed through the parting crowd. Silence followed his ascent to the platform. The auctioneer scowled. "What's your offer, mister?" Sam reached into his coat, withdrew a single gold piece, and placed it delicately on the platform's rim. $1. Explosive laughter shattered the quiet. "Hell, she's worth 10 times that." Someone shouted. Sam ignored them all. His voice, though quiet, carried like distant thunder. "I'm not purchasing her. I'm bringing her home because my son needs her more than I do." Karen stared at this stranger who showed no lust, made no advances, just stood with arms at his sides, shoulders steady while dust swirled between them. The crowd fell silent. Even Jeb Crowley's smirk faded. In that hush, Eli stepped forward, clutching a hand-carved wooden horse. For the first time that day, Karen's composure cracked, her jaw trembled slightly. Suddenly, those iron shackles felt less like condemnation and more like a doorway to something new, 2 miles west. The Coltrane Ranchamber light painted the sky when their wagon arrived. Endless scorched land stretched in every direction, broken only by a weathered wooden house with a sagging porch where wild grass brushed the steps. Karen climbed down unassisted. Though her wrists were now free, angry red marks remained where the iron had bitten. Neither she nor Sam spoke. He simply nodded toward the entrance. "I'll prepare the spare room," he said simply. "You'll have your privacy." She followed him inside. Every muscle coiled like a trapped animal's. The air held scents of wood, smoke, and something faintly floral, lavender perhaps, lingering from happier times. No feminine presence remained, no warmth or laughter, just hollow silence. A small face appeared in the hallway. A boy with unruly blonde hair and haunted eyes, hugging a worn fabric horse. He studied Karen for several heartbeats before vanishing behind the doorframe. "That's Eli," Sam explained. Setting down her belongings, "He hasn't spoken since his mother's passing." Karen said nothing. That evening, she dined alone while Sam sat across the table, barely touching his meal. After prolonged silence, he spoke. "You're no prisoner here. Leave whenever you choose, but until then, consider this home." Karen studied her bowl, then met his gaze. "Do you rescue every woman from auction blocks?" Sam's expression remained grave. "You're the first." Days drifted through the house like phantoms, quiet, slow, uncertain. Karen remained mostly indoors, contributing where possible. Sweeping floors, mending loose boards, drawing water from the well. She moved like someone inhabiting borrowed skin. Eli observed from shadows, never approaching or speaking. Sometimes their eyes would meet across doorways, or she'd hear the soft squeak of his wooden toy trailing behind him. On the fourth morning, she discovered a bundle on the porch, a cloth-wrapped basket filled with fresh bread and dried fruit. Tucked among the loaves was a folded paper bearing shaky but clear handwriting. "A woman is not merchandise to be sold, but a soul to be cherished. Martha." Karen sat on those steps for a long while, the note crumpled in her fist. She remembered Martha, the sole person in that crowd who hadn't laughed or looked away. An elderly woman with stern eyes and hands that knew both war and gentleness. It was her first taste of kindness in months, that evening. As golden light spilled across the floorboards, Karen approached where Eli sat by the fireplace, wooden horse in his lap. She cleared her throat softly. "Would you like me to repair him? His leg seems loose." She knelt beside the boy. Eli looked up, startled. For a moment, it seemed he might respond, but instead, he shook his head and clutched the toy closer. Karen didn't press. Instead, she whispered, "I owned one too at your age. I called her Sadie. She was missing an eye, but always sensed when I felt sad." Eli remained silent, but his shoulders relaxed slightly. Karen stayed a moment longer before rising. In the kitchen, Sam glanced her way. "How is he managing?" She paused before answering softly, "He's mourning, just quieter than most." Sam nodded once. "You don't have to remain," he repeated, avoiding her eyes. "I know," Karen replied. "But the silence here doesn't wound like the silence there." Outside, wind stirred the parched fields. Somewhere beyond the horizon, Dust Hollow still reeked of cruelty and ash. But here on this isolated ranch, something small and fragile had begun to breathe. Shadows of the past Kern sat alone on the back steps, her skirt's hem brushing dry earth. Wind whispered through brittle grass, carrying scents of sage and distant smoke. In her hands lay a half-mended shirt Eli had outgrown, her fingers motionless on the thread. Her gaze traveled past fence lines, past hills, toward something invisible. Unbidden memories surfaced, a New York ballroom, candlelight dancing on crystal, hollow laughter. And him, Walter Barrett, tall and polished, full of empty vows. He'd courted her with poetry, letters, silver trinkets, claiming she was unlike any woman he'd encountered. Then, the day before their wedding, the truth emerged. He was already married. She was merely a pawn in some petty game between powerful men. When she confronted him, he'd laughed. "You're not the marrying kind, Karen. You're the kind men practice on." She'd fled in disgrace alone. Penniless, heartbroken so completely it left no salvageable pieces. She blinked. Returning to the present, behind her, floorboards creaked. Sam's deliberate footsteps approached. He positioned himself a few paces back, hands in his pockets. You all right? Karen didn't turn. Do you ever wish you could erase where you came from? A pause. Every day, Sam replied. He moved past her, leaning against the porch beam. His gaze also fixed on the horizon, not looking, but remembering. I used to be quicker than any man west of the Rio Grande, he said quietly. People paid handsomely for me to make other men vanish. One clean shot. I convinced myself it was just work. Karen glanced at him. He didn't flinch. I abandoned that life when I met Mary. She never questioned the blood. She simply saw through it. Eli came a year later. I built this house with these hands. He paused, jaw rigid. She was fetching apples on market day. Some drifter tried stealing her purse, shot her when she screamed. Karen lowered her gaze. Eli witnessed it. He was 4. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Karen said, he doesn't trust me. He trusts no one, Sam replied. Not since that day. A child's cry that night, wind howled like something wounded. Karen stirred from sleep to muffled sobs. Wrapping her shawl tight, she stepped into the hall. Eli's door stood open. She found him curled beneath his quilt, hands gripping the wooden horse, tears streaming silently. Mama, don't leave, he whimpered. Mama, please return. Karen's heart clenched. Without thinking, she crossed the room, knelt by the bed, and reached for him. He flinched initially, then clung to her like a drowning child to driftwood. She wrapped her arms around him, rocking gently. I'm here, she whispered. You're safe. I won't leave tonight. She stayed until his breathing steadied, tears soaking her sleeve. At dawn, she sat with weak coffee on the porch, eyes swollen but peaceful. Sam joined her, watching the sun climb. Another nightmare? Karen nodded. He was calling for her. A pause. Did he speak to you? She looked over, her voice catching. He said, please return. Then after I held him, he whispered, don't leave. Sam's breath hitched. He covered his mouth as if to still its trembling. He hasn't uttered a word to anyone in 2 years. Karen set her cup down slowly, fingers shaking. I don't believe he was speaking to his mother anymore. I think he meant me. Neither spoke after that. But something invisible shifted between them. A thread pulled taut, a silence now pregnant with meaning. The chains that once bound Karen publicly were gone. But here in this fragile home of ghosts and grief, she realized something far more binding was forming. And for the first time in years, it didn't feel like a trap. It felt like home. Confrontation hoofbeats shattered the morning peace. Dust spiraled skyward as 4 riders approached at a measured pace. Leading them rode Jeb Crowley, vest flapping, hat pulled low, scowl etched like dried leather across his features. Karen spotted them first from the window, her pulse skipping. She stepped back and turned sharply. Sam, she called quietly. They're coming. He was already reaching for his hat. Karen hurried to the front door where Eli stood frozen, clutching her skirt. She knelt and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Stay inside. Eli, don't open the door. He nodded once, wide-eyed, and melted into the hall's shadows. Karen remained behind the door, but cracked it enough to see. Sam walked slowly toward the gate, boots silent on packed earth. He passed the post where his rifle hung and left it untouched. Hands remaining at his sides, Jeb and his men reined up just outside the property line. Well, Jeb called, voice thick with arrogance. Thought I'd pay a visit, seeing as you've got something belonging to me. Sam didn't move. She's not property. Jeb chuckled and spat sideways. She's collateral. I paid legally for her. You paid an auctioneer what he demanded. I paid what I chose. You think 1 coin makes her yours? She doesn't belong to me, Sam said levelly. She's free, but she's here, and I won't let you take her. One of Jeb's men, young, twitchy fingers always near his pistol grip, leaned forward. Boss, this is pointless. Let's just drag her out. Karen's breath caught. She squeezed Eli's hand tighter. His small fingers trembled in hers. The man edged his horse forward, hand moving to his revolver. Sam took a single step toward the gate. Then slowly, deliberately, he let his right hand brush his holster's top. He didn't draw or raise his voice, but his eyes locked on the would-be gunman, steady as stone. "If you want to try," he said, "you'd better shoot fast. But know this, that little boy behind that door is watching. And he's already buried one parent." The silence was immediate, heavy, suffocating. The young gunman swallowed hard. Jeb narrowed his eyes. "You threatening us, Coltrane?" Sam didn't blink. "No, just telling you what's at stake." A long moment passed. Breeze stirred dust around their boots. Then Jeb sneered, jerked the reins back sharply, and wheeled his horse around. "Come on. She ain't worth the trouble." The others hesitated, but followed. The young one last to leave, never again meeting Sam's gaze. Karen pushed the door open as they rode away. She stepped out with Eli behind her, both wordless. Sam remained at the gate, eyes fixed on the road long after dust had settled. When Karen reached him, she didn't speak. Instead, she stood beside him in the quiet. Only after a full minute did she whisper, "You could have killed them." "I could have," he replied. "But I don't want my son thinking a gun solves every problem." Karen looked back at the house where Eli watched from the doorway. "I think you just taught him something far greater," for the first time since she'd arrived. Her hand brushed lightly, accidentally against his. Neither pulled away. Growing bonds, days rolled by with the rhythm of simple living, mornings filled with chores, afternoons chasing shade, evenings thick with cricket songs. Slowly, like snow melting in spring, the space between Karen and Sam began to thaw. They mended fences together. Side by side, hammer strikes on wood-breaking silences that once felt too heavy. Karen rolled up her sleeves, sweat beading her brow, not from obligation but quiet determination. Sam would hand her a nail without speaking. She'd accept it without looking. In the garden, they pulled weeds and planted new growth, onions, tomatoes, carrots. When Sam showed her how to work the soil just right, his hand brushed hers. Neither flinched. Eli grew more open too. Karen read to him each night by the fireplace, tracing letters with his tiny fingers. Sometimes he'd lean against her side, cheek resting on her arm, and she'd pause, heart aching with something too gentle to name. And Sam watched. Watched how she tucked the quilt closer around Eli's shoulders, how she smiled when he pronounced a word correctly. He noticed her fingers flutter when she thought no one observed, how she stood outside at dusk, studying the sky like she was awaiting a sign. One night rain came hard. Thunder rolled across the plains, rattling shutters and turning dry earth to mud. Karen hadn't appeared for supper. Sam knocked once on her door, then entered. She was curled in bed, soaked with sweat, cheeks flushed with fever. The basin beside her held half-cooled water. The lamp flickered low. He crossed to her quickly and touched her forehead. "Too hot, Karen," he murmured, shaking her gently. "Karen, wake up." Her eyes opened slowly, glassy and unfocused. "I'm fine," she whispered hoarsely. "No, you're not." He pulled back the quilt, damp with heat, and fetched fresh water. He soaked a cloth, pressed it to her head. When she shivered, he sat beside her and took her hand between his own, rubbing gently for warmth. Minutes passed. The storm raged outside. Karen stirred and looked at him, eyes clouded but searching. "Why are you still here?" she asked weakly. Sam swallowed. "Because I haven't met a woman like you since Mary," he said quietly. "And because I never thought I could need someone again, not until I saw how Eli looks at you." Karen blinked, eyes welling. Without meaning to, her fingers curled into his. He leaned forward. Their lips met, soft, uncertain, lingering. A kiss born not of passion, but pain, of longing, of the fragile. Terrifying possibility of beginning again. But even before it ended, Karen's hand slipped from his. She turned her face away, tears streaking her fevered cheeks. "I can't do this," she whispered. "I want to. God, I want to. But every time I feel close to something good, it vanishes. It burns up. It leaves me alone." Sam studied her. candlelight catching every broken thing she tried to hide. He reached out, brushed damp hair from her forehead. "I'm not going anywhere, Karen." She shook her head. "You say that now?" "They all say that." He said nothing more. Instead, he stayed through the storm, through the darkness, holding her hand until the fever broke. When morning came and golden light spilled across wooden floors, her hand remained in his, but the kiss, its ache, its truth still hung heavy between them like smoke after fire. The letter sunrise crept over hills in silence. Inside the Coltrane kitchen, a single sheet of paper lay folded on the table, weighted by a smooth river stone. The ink was still fresh, though the hand that wrote it had trembled throughout. "Sam, I need to leave before I make this harder for both of us. What you and Eli have is good, whole. I don't belong in something that pure. Not after everything. Thank you for giving me a home, even if it was never meant to last." Corinne packed lightly, just enough food for a day's walk. Her boots scuffed quietly against earth as she passed the barn, past the fence posts they'd repaired together. She didn't look back. By the time Sam found the letter, the house was already too quiet. He stood over it reading twice, jaw clenched tight. The screen door creaked behind him. "Eli," he called. "Eli." No answer. He moved quickly, checked the boys' room, the barn, chicken coop shed. Empty. Panic rose like bile. He ran outside, scanning the land. No footprints in mud, no sign of the boy. Then he saw them, 2 sets of small prints heading down the hill behind the orchard. Only one set returning? Damn it, he hissed under his breath. Grabbing his coat and rifle, the rain came unexpectedly. Sharp and cold, stinging skin and soaking through wool. Karen was barely 2 miles out when she heard Sam shouting in the distance. "Karen, Eli's missing." She turned, heart plummeting. "What do you mean missing?" she called, already running toward him. They met halfway, breath ragged, clothes dripping. "He's not in the house." "Not anywhere." Karen's eyes widened. "The hill, the one with the tree, where he goes sometimes when he's alone?" They ran without speaking. Thunder cracked above them when they reached the old oak overlooking the valley. Karen stopped short. There, sitting at the tree's base, was Eli, soaked, knees drawn to his chest, clutching a handful of crushed wildflowers against his heart. Karen dropped to her knees beside him. "Eli," she cried, pulling him close. "What are you doing out here?" "You're freezing," the boy didn't answer. His small frame trembled violently, but his arms stayed wrapped around the flowers. Sam stepped closer, eyes wide, breath sharp in his throat. Eli turned to Karen. Eyes red, voice cracked. "If you leave," he whispered, "I don't want to stay here. Not without you." Karen froze. Rain slid down her face, or maybe tears. She couldn't tell anymore. "Oh, sweetheart," she murmured, hugging him tightly. "I wasn't leaving you. I thought I was protecting you. I thought you'd be better off without someone like me." Eli pressed his face into her neck, clinging harder. "You're the only one who makes the house not sad anymore." Sam stood a few feet away, hands useless at his sides. Karen looked up at him. "I didn't think I mattered this much," she said quietly. "You do," Sam said. "To both of us?" The three sat beneath that tree until rain softened to mist. When they finally stood, Karen took Eli's hand in one of hers and reached for Sam's with the other. They walked home without another word. But something had changed. Not just a reunion, a choice. And it was no longer just Karen's to make. Justice and vindication, the letter bore a federal seal. Karen's hand shook as she read it aloud by lamplight. The language was formal. The message was clear. A federal marshal had arrived in Dust Hollow to investigate unlawful transactions involving women, including her auction. She folded the letter slowly. "They're calling it trafficking," she said, voice thin. "They want me to testify." Sam's jaw tightened. He said nothing at first. Then he walked to the door, took down his hat, and turned to face her. "We're going to town tomorrow," he said. Together, the next morning, Dust Hollow was quieter than usual. But eyes followed them from every porch and alleyway as they rode into town's heart. The old saloon had been temporarily converted into a hearing hall. Wooden chairs lined the walls. A chalkboard listed witnesses. The federal marshal, dressed in blue with silver trim, stood behind a makeshift desk like a judge in church. Karen clutched her shawl tightly as she entered. Gasps rose. Whispers followed her. That's her. The girl in chains. Coltrane's woman now. Sam walked beside her, broad-shouldered and quiet. When they reached the front, the marshal looked up. Miss Mayfield, you were sold in a public auction 3 months ago. Are you here of your own will? Karen opened her mouth to speak, but Sam stepped forward first. I'll speak, he said. The marshal raised a brow. And you are? Sam Coltrane, rancher? The man who bought her. Murmurs erupted. Sam's voice didn't waver. I paid 1 coin, yes, but not to own her. I paid to stop her from being dragged into hell by Jeb Crowley and his kind. She came with me because I gave her a choice. If that makes me guilty, then I'll take the charge. Karen's eyes widened as he continued. But don't punish her, and don't drag Eli into this. He's just a boy. For the first time since his mama died, he smiles again because she's with us. The marshal leaned back in his chair. You realize what you're admitting to? I do. I also know the law has no business condemning the only decent thing that's happened to this woman in years. Tense silence fell. Then from the room's back, a chair scraped loudly. Martha stood, leaning heavily on her cane. Her voice was firm. Karen Mayfield is no criminal. She's a member of this town now, a better one than half the men who laughed that day. A man by the wall, once among the loudest during the auction, stood as well. She saved my daughter from a snake bite. Wouldn't take a penny for it. Another voice joined. She teaches my boys letters every Sunday behind the church. I've seen her clean graves no one else visits. She brought us food when my wife fell ill. One by one. Voices rose, not in accusation, but defense. The same people who once cheered her humiliation now stood in her name. The marshal looked around the room, then down at his papers and back up. Well, he said slowly, I believe I've seen enough. He stood. No charges will be filed, Miss Mayfield. You're free to go. And Mr. Coltrane, you may be a stubborn bastard, but I've seen worse. Soft laughter broke through the tension. Karen turned to Sam, lips trembling. She wasn't smiling yet, but her eyes held something brighter than fear. Hope. As they stepped outside into daylight, a small crowd followed, not to sneer, but to thank her, shake her hand. Nod at Sam with quiet respect. For the first time, Dust Hollow didn't feel like a place she'd survived. It felt like a place she could belong. A new beginning. Wildflowers bloomed in colors. The dry land rarely showed. Goldenrod, Indian paintbrush, tiny white daisies swaying beneath open sky. It was the far edge of Coltrane land, untouched by fences or plows. Years ago, Sam had buried his wedding ring here beside a flat stone under a mesquite tree, when grief had made the ranch feel like a graveyard. Now it was dressed in cloth banners and garlands of sage. A dozen townfolk stood in a loose semicircle, neighbors, not strangers, quietly waiting. Karen stepped forward across the grass, her dress plain but radiant in sunlight. There were no pearls, no veil, just a crown of woven herbs and her hair flowing free, like the river she'd once dreamed of escaping to. She carried no bouquet. She carried Eli's hand. The boy wore a shirt too big for him, sleeves rolled to his elbows. In his palm was a small, carved wooden box. When they reached Sam, Eli looked up at him and smiled, something pure and real. Karen turned to face the man who'd changed her life by not asking her to be anything but herself. I used to think, she said softly, that I had no say in where I belonged, that I'd always be taken, passed along, given away. Her voice shook slightly, but her eyes held steady. But this time, no one bought me. No one forced me. I'm here because I want to be. She paused as wind caught her hair. I choose you, Sam. I choose Eli. I choose this. Sam's eyes, always guarded, now softened. His voice, low and rough as worn leather, met hers, and my son chose you long before I found the words. He turned to Eli, stepped forward and opened the small box. Inside were two simple silver bands. Sam took one, slid it gently onto Karen's finger. Then she did the same for him. There was no preacher, no sermon, only the land and sun and truth between them. When they kissed, Eli clapped just once, and everyone laughed. Later, they shared food under the tree, where Sam once buried his grief. Children played in tall grass. Karen sat with her back against the tree, Eli's head in her lap. Sam's hand wrapped around hers. It wasn't a grand wedding, but it was honest. When the sun began falling behind hills, casting gold across fields, Karen looked up and whispered to no one in particular, "This time, I'm not someone's burden." She touched the ring. "I'm someone's choice." Where once there'd been a stage of chains and shame, there was now only earth and roots and something finally free. Epilogue if this tale stirred your soul. If you felt the dust, danger, and quiet power of love that defies everything, then don't let it end here. Hit that like button, share it with someone who still believes in second chances, and subscribe to Desert Tro's Tales for more tales of passion, redemption, and the kind of love that only the frontier could forge. Because out here, where bullets missed but hearts didn't, love always leaves its mark. We'll see you in the next story, partner.